All right, in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline and some basic editing tools, as well as importing media. I'm going to also touch on a little bit on audio. Our next project will get into a lot more audio. If this is 309, in 304, we do a little less of that direct audio manipulation, but I'll go over that in there at some point as well. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to import media, and I just want to point out that I have placed my media inside my folder for the project. If you don't do that initially, you can import it and it will import it, it will work, it'll work just fine. But what's going to happen, and this happens every single semester, is students package everything up and they go home and they realize they're missing a file, and then they get a big red error saying media not found, and that will really mess you up. So always know where your media folders are ahead of time. So I've got 4 in here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Premiere. Oh, one thing I forgot to show you too. When you make a sequence, you can choose a name for it. It's weirdly at the bottom of the panel, so I always miss it. But you can come into this panel here, your project panel, and you can go up and you can rename it. So you can see I've already named it Fire. So just be aware that you can and should name your sequences. So now I'm going to go import my media. Import them. It's going to import the media, it's going to put them down here. And you can see I can scrub through them and kind of get a thumbnail view of what they are. This is from Ben Entner's metal pour a few semesters ago, really striking video. So I thought we would use that to play around with. Now I want to point out down here for each of these thumbnails, it has some information down here which looks a little confusing. So this says 5:23. So what that means is this is 5 seconds and 23 frames. All right, so it's a little confusing at first, but if we know that, okay, this one, for example, is 6 seconds and 26 frames, well, we're working at 30 frames per second. So that's almost 7 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to use this one. I'm going to pull that in. And you'll notice that I can actually put it on a number of different layers. I'm kind of picky. I like my audio and video to be right next to each other. It's not actually that important, but I find it visually that it makes more sense. Now notice what happened. The minute I brought this video in, it gave me an error. It says, hey, this doesn't fit your sequence settings. Do you want to change the sequence settings to match the movie, or do you want to keep them? And I'm going to keep my sequence settings. Now I'm in the timeline and it's showing me my timeline. It's showing me where my scrubber bar is. So if I move, this is called the scrubber bar. All semester long, I'm going to come up and I'm going to say, can you scrub that for me? And this is what I'm talking about. I want you to move this arrow so I can see whatever it is, excuse me, that you're working on, and I can see it move. You'll notice that it's giving me a visual representation over on this side of my audio, and as well as a spectrogram down here telling me my volume of my audio as well. I'll just point out a couple other things with the interface. There's some controls, some sliders over here that allow you to zoom in or out on layers, and that can be very helpful, especially when you're working on sound, as I will show you in a minute. All right, so we've got our media, we've imported it, and I've drug it over to the sequence. Now I'm going to show you another way to do that momentarily, but for now we're just going to do it this way, and then I'll get back to in and out points shortly. So I also want to show you how to delete audio. Let's say you want to put music over this, you don't want this sound. The easiest way is to lock your video file or layer, come in here and delete your audio, and then it's gone. I just Control Z to bring it back in, because I want to show you how to work with the audio here in a second. Another very useful tool here is a razor tool, and you'll notice if I've got my scrubber bar here. If I move my scrubber bar, let's say I'm watching my video up here. By the way, let me just show you, I can zoom in or out on my video up here. So if I want to see close up, all right, so I can zoom in or out as needed. But if I move this scrubber bar where I want to cut, I can just take this little razor and I can cut, all right? Then you can take your selection tool. Let's say I want to get rid of that. Just delete it. Just hit the delete key and it is gone. Now, if I did that in an actual edit, let's see what happens here. Notice how the audio just quickly cuts out. That's super annoying. So let's say I wanted to use this, but I wanted the audio to fade. This is where these little handles come in very handy. Haha, pun intended. To control my audio, I'm going to go grab this pen tool, and I am going to put an anchor point at the beginning of my audio. And let's say I wanted to come in here and I want to fade my audio. I want to drop it out. I'm going to add another pinpoint, and then I can drag that, and that is going to directly affect my volume. Let's say I want to come in here, I want to pull it back up, then I want it to fade again. So now if I play this back, okay, you can hear it quickly fade in and out. All right, so I'm going to bring in another clip now, but I'm going to do it in a slightly different way. And that is, I'm going to come in, let's see, this one's a really long video. If I double click, it's going to load it in my source window. I can play it here, and I can also scrub it. And if I don't want to pull that whole video down, so I don't want to have to cut it up once it's in the timeline. What I can do instead of that is I can find my location where I want the video to start, and I just hit the I button on my keyboard, and that marks an endpoint. If I scroll to where I want it to end and hit the O on my keyboard, that's its out point. So now I can drag this into my timeline, and it's only bringing in what's between the I and the O. It's still pretty long, so I might want to come in. Let's say I want to delete that. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to adjust this. I can pull this in manually. Let's say that's too long. So I just want it in between this in and out. Then I bring it back in, and there we go. Now I did something here on purpose. You'll notice that I didn't accidentally, I did it on purpose, but there's a gap between these two. Now, even if there is a tiny, tiny gap, when this plays, you will notice it. Even if it's a millisecond, your audience is going to notice that bleep. So, handy tool, right click, ripple delete. It'll pull everything right together for you, and there you go. So that's some very basic tools of editing. And in the next tutorial is actually an old tutorial that goes over layers, layer effects and scaling, and then the tutorial after that is going to be working with text. So there you go.